Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Novel Idea. I'm Dia and today we are going to do a Friday Reads. All right, so today I have 9 books to talk about, but 3 of them are going to be very brief. Let's get started. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about my DNFs first. And I will start with this one. So this is a book of poetry, and I had read her previous book of poetry. I enjoyed her other book that I had read quite a bit. This one got a little too, I don't know, YA for me. It sounded like it was going to be this wonderful kind of ode to her family, and there is some of that, I feel like, but mostly it's just about her wanting to do her own thing and blowing off some steam. That's what it feels like. I DNF'd it. A surprising one, a very surprising one, is Edith Wharton's Summer. I DNF'd this. Didn't feel like an Edith Wharton novel to me. It didn't feel right. I don't know how else to explain it. So this was my other DNF. This one, The Regency Years, this is by Robert Morrison, and I used this basically just as a reference and kind of picked and chose what it was that I read about in the Regency years. And I learned quite a lot and it was good, but I don't have any desire to go through the rest of it. And so I read Expanding Empire and Waging War. I read Crime and Punishment and the Pursuit of Freedom. And then I read a little bit about the theaters of entertainment and a little bit about the modern world. It's very textbook, dry style of writing. Okay, so the next 2 books I have already returned to the library, so let me tell you about them. One is The River Enchanted, and this is by Rebecca Ross, and it is sort of a myth, like Greek myth type thing, and sort of fantasy, and I actually really enjoyed it. I gave it a B+. It's an 87%. I think the world building could have been just a little bit better and a little less teenager grumbling from our main character. Lots of grumbling and wondering and whining and self-pity and kind of petty games that he wanted to play. There is an island, very isolated, 2 kind of warring clans on the island. They are divided by a river through the island. And the main character is gifted in music, and he is sent away from his childhood home on this island that has so much myth and lore and wonder surrounding it that it is left alone by everyone. Nobody even wants to go into those waters because they just know that something horrible is going to happen to them, especially if they are not invited by the people from the island. So anyway, he is sent away to basically learn to become a bard. And he does that, and he is summoned back home for a specific reason that he doesn't completely understand at the time. He returns in the midst of upheaval and suspicions and finds so much that has changed in the 11 years since he has been gone, and at the same time things that haven't changed at all. which is always the case when we go back to revisit something. The narration of this is not very crisp. That's the only way I know how to say it. It's just not, it feels very kind of lumpy bumpy. Anyway, there's something very scary happening on the island, and he discovers his ability to help, and he also finds strength in not trying to do it alone. And so, yeah, there are feuding clans, like I said, there's magic and myth and lore, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a unique story. I do not think it is a standalone. I'm sure that there's another one out there, because this book is older. I didn't write down the publication date, you guys, I'm sorry. But that was A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, and it was a B+ from me. Okay, so the next one is just fun. This book is called Hounded. It's by Kevin Hearne. I mentioned it in my dog tag video. It is about the only living druid living in our present day times, and running away from gods and demigods and things like this that basically want him dead. And we don't know exactly why they want him dead until a little later in the story. It reminded me a little bit of Dresden Files. I don't know if you guys have read those or not, but Jim Butcher, Dresden Files. And that one is about a wizard who is like a private investigator, and he's the only wizard left alive. And so this character is very connected to the earth, as druids were, and that's where he continues to get his rejuvenation. And he looks like he's, probably 23, 25 years old, and he's actually thousands and thousands of years old. And he has an animal companion. Oberon is his name, and he is an Irish wolfhound. And our main character is also Irish. He goes by the name of Atticus, and which is like a play off of his actual name. And he's living in a little tiny town in Arizona for certain reasons. Those are very specific. And if that's all this would have been, I would have loved this book. But it was just a little too smutty. Scuzzy is the word I was gonna use. For me, it's a little overly sexualized. There's a lot of cussing, heavy writing in here. I really liked parts of it, and I really found it very funny at parts. But I was also turning pages because I didn't want to read the overly sexualized stuff. And every time somebody would go off on a rant and start their expletives, I just would be like, really? You're a demigod or a 2,000-year-old druid and you can't come up with something better than that? So anyway, I ended up giving it a B. Could have been a B-. That's what it was. So my next one is this one here. This is called Heartstone, and it is by Elle, Katherine White. And I was reading this for Jane Austen July. I thought that because it was fantasy more than Regency, that I was really gonna appreciate it. But it felt like a literal, let's put some dragons in here and make the wealthy ruling class dragon riders, and everything else is going to be exactly the same as Jane Austen's books. So it's a little bit of a mashup of Jane Austen's books, but it's still Jane Austen's books, even down to character names. Our main character's last name, instead of being Bennett, is like Benedict. It was very close. Instead of Elizabeth, it was Eliza. Yeah. There are some things that happen that don't happen in Jane Austen's novels because Jane Austen doesn't have dragons. But for the most part, the story outline is exactly the same. I didn't enjoy this as much as I had hoped I was going to. So to me, even the writing was not as pithy the way that Jane Austen writes. So the fact that it was so close to her storyline and didn't have that didn't do it any favors. So this was a B- from me, 81%. I'm sad about that, but I think I'll be putting this into a little free library or Goodwill or something. My next one is the end of my Dostoevsky short stories. I cannot tell you how sad I am to not have another Dostoevsky short story to read. I did just hear from a friend about another set of short stories that she has really enjoyed, and so I may try to find that one because I'm gonna miss being in Dostoevsky's world, in his mind and his thoughts. So my last two were The Heavenly Christmas Tree and The Peasant Mary. And both of them were more poignant, more weighty than The Meat Creature. So both these ones, both the Heavenly Christmas Tree and The Peasant Mary, were weightier and more introspective than even A Meat Creature was. He shows us a duality of viewpoints. And so he takes our normal viewpoints of the season of Christmas. We'll start with the Christmas tree one. He takes our normal viewpoints of Christmas and things like the twinkling of lights, and he shows us the shadows and the darkness. And he takes the lavishness of the meals and the treats and the baking and all of that, and shows us starvation, and talks to us about the lack. And he takes us from gifts and giving to loss and not even having something to hoard, let alone give. Takes us from what we think of oftentimes in winter season as warmth, like the warmth of love and the warmth of shelter and the warmth of having enough, and flips it to the shivering and the cold and the frozen, the stiffness of a corpse even. And he does that through showing us aloneness, of exposure and to the elements themselves, and of death. I have so come to appreciate Dostoevsky through these short stories. I appreciated him before. I've always loved his writing, always thought he was a genius. But I've seen him as much more than a novelist, because these stories are essays and political and spiritual philosophy and social philosophy. And he writes bluntly and fearlessly, absolutely fearlessly, about humanity of all classes in just very vivid and truthful expression. And he had everything to lose in his day in doing that. I'll leave you with a little quote about that kind of sums up Dostoevsky's writing, I think. And it is this: the more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. I'm gonna miss this book. A+, 98%. Another nonfiction. And this is the other one that I was saying, I think is, can you see it? How are we gonna do this? There. This is the other one that I feel is very textbookish in some ways. The writing style in here is very dry. She spends most of her time in this book wanting to disprove or arguing the validity of other biographers, which I didn't find enjoyable or helpful. But there are little nuggets of history, both of Jane Austen's personal history and also of England and the world, that lent significance to what Jane was writing about. And so in that respect, I really appreciated it. So this was not graded because it's a nonfiction. Onward. My last two that I have for you are both winners. Winners in different ways though, and one I definitely enjoyed more than the other one. So my first one that I'm going to talk to you about is JL Carr's A Month in the Country. And this is a little tiny book. I think that total it's like 135 pages. It's very short. It's about a war veteran who, upon returning home, finds that his wife is no longer who he thought she was. She doesn't want to be with him, and he already has a lot of healing to do after coming home from the war. He is also an artist, and he is hired by a very small little hamlet village to restore a painting on their chapel wall. He is hired for a specific amount and does not have to get it done in a certain amount of time, which is very significant to the story. The things that I didn't appreciate about it is that the marriage feels very much like the marriage of Hosea in the Bible. He has a lot to say about his wife instead of focusing on himself sometimes. It feels like that's what it felt like to me. I'm sure it doesn't feel like that to everybody, but from somebody who has the perspective of having to fight for things in a marriage and who has had to overcome a lot of selfishness, I just felt like it could have focused a little bit more on him and a little less on her. He finds community, he finds purpose, he finds just the normal, everyday, ordinary life of this town, this little tiny village, to be bucolic. It's idyllic to him. And it takes on almost, in fact, he states this at one point in the book. He says that the outside world is like a dream, but inside is reality. He builds relationships, he finds friends. You get tragedy, you get humor, you get sociology, you get missed and mourned opportunities, and you get healing from what life has dealt that you don't understand. And so he believes in hope, which is ultimately what saved this book for me. And so I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from it. So often, the happiest days of our lives are the ones where nothing happens. And this is the other one. We can ask and ask, but we can't have ever again what once seemed ours forever. So I found JL Carr's writing to be very, it wasn't a magical book for me, but it was a book that expressed well the magic of the ordinary. I gave that one a B, and so 85%. This is gonna go down in my favorite reads for 2022, I think. I was so surprised by this book. Absolutely loved it. And that is The Road Past Altamonte by Gabrielle Roy. Our narrator of the book begins as a little girl, and she relates to the reader 4 different stories about 3 women, 3 generations of women, are delicate but have such strength that formed her and who she became, and wove in her this sturdy heart and spirit. And this was absolutely lovely. How many pages is this one? This one's not very many either. 146. 146 pages. And she takes those 4 interconnected stories. What's the word? Like catechizes? Is what, like a catechism almost of how she comes to understand aging and making meaning of her history and grasping and understanding her own flaws. She brings it full circle to where there's such an appreciation because of the aging process. The difference between being a human being and a human doing is very explored in here. It's very gentle. It's a very gentle narrative. It's lyrical, and it's mystical in its understanding of just humanity, especially of being a woman. I just found it a completely ordinary life that was celebrated extraordinarily. in here. Also wanted to read you a couple of quotes from this one. Why is it that a human being knows no greater happiness in its old age than to find once more the face it wore as a child? I loved that. I'm old. And the older I get, the more I like it. What does life, this is her mom talking to her grandmother. What does life seem to be, ma mère, when one reaches your age? A dream, ma chère. Not more than a dream. The Road Past Altamonte, Gabrielle Roy, A+. I loved it. I'm looking forward to reading more from her. I am reading for Jane Austen July. I'm reading, can you see this? Samuel Johnson and James Boswell's A Journal of the Western Islands of Scotland and the Journal of a Tour of the Hebrides. And I'm actually on a tour of the Hebrides right now. And I'm enjoying it. I find the writing style a little ancient, but that's okay. I'm also currently, I have to go pick it up, so it will become current. Age of Death by Michael J. Sullivan, which is book 5 in the Legends of the First Empire. I only have that one and one more, and then I'm done with that, which is kind of sad. I'll be reading A Jane Austen Christmas, which is celebrating the season of romance, ribbons, and mistletoe in the Regency era. And then I'm going to finally pick up Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton, The Pride and Prejudice of the Dragon World. And I'm hoping that this one is better than the Hearthstone one and doesn't just slip dragons into Pride and Prejudice and Emma and all of the other things. So I have high hopes. So that one. And then this week I begin my buddy reads with The Midnight Reader, and Rosica and I are going to be reading this, and so are Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia and I are going to be reading this. And one of Tiffany's friends and followers is joining us in reading this as well. Separate buddy reads, same book. And really, really looking forward to getting back into this. It'll be, I think Tiffany may have read it before, but she doesn't remember anything about it. And then Rosica and the other lady joining us have never read it. In fact, one of them has never read any Jane Austen. So this is going to be exciting, and I'm really happy to be joining in on all of it with them. So that is it from me, you guys. I hope you all had a lovely 4th of July and that your week has treated you well. I will try to link everything down below that I talked about today. Thank you again for coming and listening to all of these little reviews and catch-ups, and I hope that all is well, and I will see you in the next video, everybody. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to.